Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Rafik Hodzic. I'm a senior advisor with the European Institute for Peace. Thank you for joining us today for this important event, I would say. Um, the event is titled Roadmap to a Safe Environment in Syria, Resetting the Political Process Towards a Sustainable Solution of Syrian Crisis. The title itself implies the task we have ahead of us. But before I introduce the topics and the esteemed speakers who have joined us today, let me first say that this is an event co-organized by the Syrian Association for Citizens' Dignity and the European Institute of Peace. We are thankful to those who have come from literally different sides of the world to join us today, from Europe, Turkey, United States, here in Brussels, but also to, I think, around 100 people who are with us online, including one of the speakers in this panel, Dr. Mazen Kseibi, member of the Board of Trustees of the Syrian Association for Citizens' Dignity. I highlight this because he is supposed to be sitting in that chair over there that you see in the panel, which is empty. But unfortunately, he and a number of our colleagues, Syrians who reside in Turkey, were unable to be with us today for visa issues. Which unfortunately highlights the difficult situation that Syrians generally, but also including those who are in fact advocating and trying to be their voice, are facing in getting, let's say figuratively, their seat at the table where issues of importance to their lives are being discussed. The event is aiming to address the issue of safe environment, something that is at the heart of any hope for a sustainable solution of the Syrian crisis. We will look at this issue from different points of view, from different sides of the analysis. We have two, I would say, without any exaggeration, stellar panels today. The first one titled SACDs. SACD is the acronym for the Syrian Association for Citizens' Dignity, Roadmap Envisioning a Safe Environment in Syria. This panel will focus, among other points of view, on a seminal document produced by the Syrian Association for Citizens' Dignity called Roadmap to a Safe Environment, result of several years of work to try and define in practical terms what implementation of a safe environment in Syria would in fact look like to address needs and aspirations of Syrians and primarily displaced Syrians. And in this panel, I will welcome, aside from Dr. Mazen Kseibi, whom I've already introduced, Dr. Hala Al-Ghawi, who is also a board member of SACD, Dr. Talal Sumbuli, who is one of the founders of the association, and Dr. Samir Al-Taki, General Director of the Orient Research Center. I will stress that Dr. Talal and Dr. Samir have joined us, especially for this event, from the United States. And one last technical observation, actually two, for those following us online, there are two channels of interpretation. If you're having trouble, please just send a question. Our team will be happy to address it. For those here in Brussels, channel 1 is English interpretation, channel 2 is Arabic. For those who need it and didn't get it, the equipment is on the chairs or in the corner there. And lastly, for those following us online, we, of course, have envisaged these panels to be, first and foremost, exchanges and discussions. And we hope that we will get that both here in Brussels with the audience, but also online. Any questions that you may have, please write them in the chat of the webinar, and we will ask the question to the panel members, address it to whom you would like to address the question. As I said, in writing, and can be both Arabic or English, and our team will relay it to us. And let me just, although we will give them, of course, their due attention in the second panel, but just to introduce the speakers there as well, we have Mohammed Al-Hanim, Policy Chief of the Syrian American Council, who's joined us from the United States. We have Ivan Nielsen, former Danish Special Representative for the Syria crisis, who is with us. And we have Omer Ozcilcic, I hope I did justice to your surname, a non-residential fellow of Atlantic Council and member of Omran Institute, who joins us from Ankara. Let me now turn to our speakers in the first panel, and I will start with Dr. Hala to address the question of the safe environment. These days we see that safe environment has become somewhat of a buzzword in policy-making circles. There are different interpretations of it, which we will discuss in more detail later. But I want to ask you to tell us fundamentally, why is the issue of safe environment so crucial to Syrians, especially displaced Syrians? And what would be the kind of steps that we are looking to see this safe environment established in Syria?
شكرا أستاذ رفيق.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Rafiq. If I have to begin, there are many fears among the Syrians when thinking about returning to Syria. There are a lot of them. In principle, we have security fears and detention, arbitrary detention, and also crimes that have occurred in Syria in the last months and the last years. So we cannot even think about coming. We cannot link returning to Syria thinking that it is a safe environment when these crimes and violations are still continuing on the field. Now, we spoke about the political process, solution. We have spoken a lot about the initiatives that are underway, carried out, when the constitution, the discussion, negotiation on the constitution, the UN initiative, the international community, about the revamping, resetting the political process. Well, this is not viable when these fears are still happening in Syria. Syrians are refugees. Syrians are IDPs within Syria. This is a very uncomfortable, very insecure situation. And the people who are outside, the refugees, cannot possibly think about coming back to Syria unless we sort the problem of the safe environment. The Syrians themselves, how do they define the safe environment? I mean, we have to take into account the very definition by the Syrians, the refugees, because a lot of countries say that Syria is secure and they are taking initiatives to resettle and provide conditions to the returnees, etc. This is the narrative that is taken by many foreign countries. However, the safe environment for me is the absolute foundation to any initiative undertaken by the international stakeholders to encourage, to restabilize Syria.
So basically what we are in fact talking about is that there are and we are going to talk about the roadmap now, but in essence, if we are talking about even considering a possibility of any political solution, if we are even talking about any possibility of talking about return, there is a basic requirement. People who are returning have to not be killed or detained or abused. So this is like the minimum of the concept of the safe environment. And then we have, and I invite you now to talk to us in more detail about the concept that was presented in the roadmap that Syrian Association for Citizen Dignity produced. I want to say that I know, because I was involved in conversations about this. This work started in 2019. It involved countless hours of consultations among displaced Syrians about what would safe environment mean, what it would look like. It involved consultation with some of the most authoritative constitutional law experts from Syria, international experts who were advising on relevant international examples when it comes to return of large-scale displacement. And the concept that is captured in the roadmap is practical implementation of safe environment that doesn't only apply to, let's say, return of refugees, but actually gives a roadmap to establishing conditions for a sustainable solution in Syria. Please give us the details on this concept and how you came about it.
شكرا مرة أخرى. الحقيقة
Thank you once again. The roadmap for safe environment that was prepared by the Syrian Association for Citizen Dignity. This roadmap, in principle, it spoke about practical measures that are applicable in the field. This comprises practical measures. The paper divided the roadmap of the safe environment into 3 pillars. So pre-return measures, during the return, and post-return measures. These measures are the only measures that may make Syria stable based on the understanding of the Syrians themselves. If we talk about the pre-return processes, which is to reinforce the protection, to put an end to the violation of their rights, and also to revamp the frozen political process, which is at a deadlock. If we want to talk about the measures regarding the displaced, we have the principle of freedoms and rights. These are things that we look forward to: the freedom of association, freedom of speech, freedom of safe demonstration. These rights are the foundations, and they need to be in Syria before the return, so that when people return, they know that they are going to be in a safe. We need also the general amnesty on all crimes that happened or linked to the crisis in Syria. We need to have this amnesty because that would encourage the Syrians, because a lot of returnees are literally wanted by the regime and the security apparatus. So people will not return because they are afraid that if they come, they are going to be detained and prosecuted. There are also measures with regard to the security apparatus. As you know, when we talk about the security in Syria, Normally, this should refer to safety, security, protection. However, when we say security in Syria, it has a whole different connotation. We are talking about this is the equivalent of violation of tyranny, and therefore we need to restructure the security apparatus under one body which is accountable, and this is an absolute requirement in the association's document. With regard to the armed forces and the army, instead of having a confession-based military army, we need to have a national army whose mandate is to protect the borders and not be a tyrannic tool within Syria. And these are absolute important measures so that the Syrians and refugees to come back to our countries. So the army should be literally looking at the borders, protecting the Syrian borders, and not being a tyrannic hand in Syria. Now, this is one thing. Another thing, we had there were courts that were set up in Syria whose aim were to criminalize any dissent, any demonstration. So we need to have also the right of property, to reclaim the properties. It is the right of every Syrian to have his land back, house back, and therefore we cannot possibly accept that the properties of the Syrians who are displaced are lost. The right of return is absolutely fundamental. The right to return is a human right, basically. It is a fundamental right. It is enshrined in the international conventions. This is something totally obvious to reclaim the right of return, and also the right of not returning as well. This should be also protected, because a lot of people cannot return to their homeland because, you have to imagine what has been stated in the SACD roadmap. We cannot sort out the problems overnight. We cannot take those in a blink of an eye. All the violations are going to be sorted out. So people who have been displaced, who live in the diaspora, they have the right of not returning to Syria now until the safe environment conditions are there. I don't want to be very long on this one. As to returns, to the conditions that accompany the return during the returning process. Obviously, we need a guarantor. We need the international community. We need somebody that overlooks the process. International organizations, the United Nations. We need to have a systematic plan to organize the return of the refugees, the displaced, to the areas from which they have been displaced, evicted, and they shouldn't return to other places that are not theirs, because we don't want to have that population re-engineering. I think people have the right also to move. The right of movement should be also safeguarded, and they need to be able to choose the destination, the area where they want to be returned. Now, with regard to the reforming of the judiciary, the military, these are also fundamental. Also, we need to have also measures of accountability. All perpetrators have to be held accountable, and with regard to the measures, there's another thing regarding to uncover the fate of the disappeared. There is not one single family in Syria who doesn't have somebody who has been disappeared. This is absolutely fundamental for us, because any any trust-building measure with the de facto regime. I mean, we need to sort the problem of the disappeared. I'm not looking about specific area. I'm looking at the whole Syria. So the de facto government regime is absolutely obliged to let us find out where the displaced people are, where the disappeared people are, because all the forcibly disappeared, we need to know where their fate is. Last thing, once the displaced are back, we spoke about the right of property, and now we go back to the reconstruction in the framework of the political process that are happening at the UN and the relief. Many people speak about construction. Now, what reconstruction can we talk about? I mean, we cannot reconstruct unless what I said earlier have been crystallized in the field. I mean, we don't have the bare minimum for to think about starting about reconstruction. However, if we think about reconstruction, it has to be fair, even in all the areas of Syria, not in one area at the detriment of the other. The infrastructure has to be rehabilitated. The basic services have to be also revamped to encourage the people who are displaced to come back to Syria.
I feel that we only scratched the surface of this document, even in this kind of extended summary, considering how detailed and dedicated to actually addressing the situation on the ground it is. And I just want to, before I go to Dr. Mazen in Istanbul, I want to say that what strikes me is that it reflects the experience that we Bosnians have gone through. Because return, although you can imagine it as, I don't know, somebody switching on the green light, there is a political agreement and we guarantee the freedoms and all that. And this is very important, that we are not talking about confidence building measures between the displaced and those who have displaced them. We're talking about confidence building measures between the displaced and international guarantors of the rights that they will have. Even when that happens, it took me years to be able to return to my hometown, to return my property, to completely reconstitute my rights. The implementation of it is a struggle, but the international guarantees and international oversight of the implementation is a key concept that the roadmap addresses. Now I will turn to Dr. Mazen Ksebi, the board member of the Syrian Association for Citizens' Dignity, to address one crucial issue in all this, and that is that while these conversations that are taking place about the future of Syria, they often don't really address what are the needs and intentions and aspirations of Syrians themselves. What the association has excelled in is to constantly produce reports and documents which are grounded in consultations with Syrians and displaced Syrians in particular. In this instance, the association has just issued another report, which is a result of a survey of more than 3,000 people in the Syrian regime-held areas and SDF areas, which talks about their understanding of the situation, the needs that they have, their intentions, their conditions for eventual return, and unfortunately, their dwindling belief in the possibility of a political solution. Dr. Mazen, can you please tell us what are the main concerns and intentions of Syrians that you have captured in this latest report, which has a very indicative title, Fading Vision of a Safe Syria? You are on mute.
Greetings to everybody, and I would like first of all to thank everybody who has participated in organizing this opportunity for us to address everybody. Thank you also for those attending and also interveners in this forum. Firstly, I would like to emphasize here an important point. The association was never working through a number of individuals only. All the fruits of its efforts were based on communication and contact with all aspects of Syrian society that we could reach and communicate with. With regards to this latest report, and in answer to your question, I will start by quoting what the Syrians themselves have said and what we have summarized as follows. Let's have a look quickly at the outcomes or the results of our survey. As you've mentioned, we've mentioned 3,000 Syrians, including refugees and IDPs, in addition to individuals who were not forced to leave their country after 2011. 75%, three-quarters of Syrians in the areas under regime control, and over half of those in the northeast of Syria do not feel safe, and they face risks such as arbitrary detention and violence related to the conflict. A vast majority of those living under the regime live under the poverty line, and 72% of them rely on humanitarian support. And this shows a reality that only 1.1% of refugees have expressed that they have no intention to go back to Syria over the next year. Sorry, the figure is much higher than this because of the security situation and major obstacles. And it turned out that arbitrary detention are one of the greatest risks faced by the Syrians in regime areas. In spite of the regime's efforts with regards to its media propaganda in this regard. For example, 17% only of participants said that their relatives detained previously by the regime have been released under the decree for amnesty that was promulgated recently. So only 17% were released. Half of the population, 50%, we are talking about millions of people. So half of those living under the regime and in northeast Syria have said they are dissatisfied with the economic conditions in the areas they live in. Finally, three-quarters of Syrians in regime areas who said that they are thinking or considering migration if they are given the opportunity to do so, stated that economic imperatives were behind their need to migrate, which means that migration is still a door that's open to Syrians. The escape of the conditions is still open to them. And many of those who have gone back to regime areas or northeast areas have said that they would not recommend anybody to repeat their own experience and to return to Syria. And here I'll give you a summary, an answer to your question. It's clear through the survey is that without fundamental essential changes to the regime and its security apparatus and changes in economic and social situations inside the country, refugees and IDPs would not go back home in large numbers. To the contrary, more Syrians would leave Syria. Of course, the reform of the security sector, which was one day a key component of 2245 resolution, was one of the solutions presented to the Syrians. So although they haven't left their homes, they still threaten, they still live under the shadow of arbitrary detention and abuse in the areas of the regime. So this is my answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mazen. Yet this is consistent messaging that we are getting from displaced Syrians. I think that if you were to look at reports, similar reports that have been produced by the association, but not only the association, UNHCR and others, we constantly see that security is the main concern of people who cannot return in the current circumstances, and that the conditions that cause them to flee are still there when it comes to threats that they are facing. Yet what we see, unfortunately, in this policy conversation sometimes, we were talking about it earlier and compared it to the definition of insanity by someone. That it's contentious whether it's Albert Einstein or someone else, but that you are trying the same thing over and over and expecting different results. So what we have heard in some conversations, especially when it comes to Western governments, is that the recent measures and moves by the Syrian regime are creating a more positive environment, that safety and security is not an issue for the people as much as it is the economic situation when it comes to return. What would be your response to these kinds of assertions based on the data that you have from your research?
Thank you once again. Firstly, I would like to discuss this issue of the definition of a safe environment in view or from the point of view of Syrians and others. It is very important, it's crucial to emphasize the necessity of having a unified definition of the safe environment as described in the roadmap, because the definition deals with the causes of migration and displacement. And in other words, if we do not deal with the root causes, we will not achieve a result or a solution in Syria. For example, the behavior of the security services and the army and the corruption of the legal system are the foundations, are the causes, and without tackling them, we will not have stability in Syria. And there are some proposals that we're hearing about, for example, a conducive economic environment or safe areas, but not safe environments. These proposals, these ideas, hollow out the definition, the proper definition of a safe environment as described in the roadmap, and means that it will no longer be a foundation for a sustainable political solution in the country. And this leads us to another issue. We must emphasize the importance of implementing a safe environment in phases, as Dr. Haller mentioned it, and I don't wish to repeat what she said. Also, we have this a paralysis in the political process today, and we ask or demand all actors, Syrian and international, to adopt a unified political discourse which considers that the A safe environment for Syrians is the foundation of should be the foundation of a political solution. And to stop the discussions and the other ideas that do not lead to any solution, but only increase the pressures on Syrians. So we reiterate that the definition of a safe environment must be based on a political agreement that is based on 2245 and achieves what the Syrians have always demanded under or with international guarantees. Thank you.
Let me ask you then one more question before we go to the next panelist, and that is, you speak about the political process and the paralysis of the political process. Some call it even the dead political process on Syria. How do Syrians view the possibility of a political solution today? And how do they see the discourse around the safe environment that exists in policy-making circles, since this is one of the issues that you have addressed in your latest report?
Very briefly, there is a despondency and hope has vanished amongst the majority of Syrians. Any hope of having a light at the end of the tunnel. And this is important and must be taken into account because there is pressure on Syrians, on psychological pressure, which may lead to an explosion among Syrians, and we don't know what that would lead to. And there is a lack of confidence. Many refugees and IDPs who have lost many loved ones and their property. There's no belief that the people who have caused their displacement, who have caused all their suffering, will be the same people who will welcome them back and guarantee their safety. For example, the regime and its latest decrees, or for example, for amnesty, the Syrians have seen the result of those moves, that no one was released except some criminals. So they've seen the results of the moves by the regime, which have only led to an increase in the gap between the regime and the population. There is no confidence, there is no trust, in spite of all the attempts of the regime to whitewash its image vis-a-vis the international community. Us Syrians know none of this has been implemented on the ground, and it's only an image that the regime is trying to present to the international community, whilst the vast majority of Syrians have no trust or confidence in this regime that has caused this suffering to its people. Another point, Syria today, because of its geography, is not under, or geographically is not under one party's control. It's under multiple controls. And this increases the lack of confidence and the despondency amongst the population. On the other hand, Syrians, wherever they are around the world, in displacement areas in Syria or in the hosting countries, have been isolated into cantons, and this will increase the pressure on Syrians. And all this must be taken into account. And we'll remind everybody that Syrians in March 2011 started peaceful demonstrations, asking for only three things: freedom, dignity, and equality. And the result was detention and murder and barrel bombs and chemical weapons. So how could a nation that was killed trust its killers after all this? This is why we call for taking the situation inside Syria in account into account and to prevent an explosion that may happen very soon. Thank you.
Thank you. This leads us naturally to the next question, which I will address to Dr. Talal Sumbuli, one of the founders of the association, who has very clear access and good knowledge of how Syria is viewed from diaspora community, especially in the US, but elsewhere as well. We see how quick some governments in the West and regionally are to describe Syria as safe now. We see what is happening, especially with Lebanon, for instance, and forced return of people. How is, in fact, Syria seen by those outside Syria, and especially in diaspora communities? Thank you. Take the microphone, please.
Thank you, Rafiq. The situation probably will be more beneficial at the same time if we reflect on the issue of the Syrian refugee, that didn't happen for the last 12, 13 years only. It's been happening for 60 years. So what happened in the last 60 years has been rooted in the brain of Syrians and in multiple generations. So we're not talking about one generation being affected with what happened with them in the last 20 years or the last 13 years. It is 60 years that is going on, affected at least 2 generations during this process. And the Syrian in the United States are not different from other Syrians. Although they have the capacity to be able to see it a little bit more carefully, probably, because they're close to the United Nations, to the place where the decision is made in Washington, D.C., and the freedom we have in the United States in relation to expressing ourselves and being able to travel and say it. So this kind of situation affected the mind of the Syrians in the United States and otherwise, make it very important for those of us who are talking about returning or having the chance or the capacity or the feasibility for Syrian refugee to go back to Syria. This required has to be really completely met. Otherwise, we'll be not serving ourselves nor serving the refugee, and at the same time, probably leading to a situation that will be deepening the problem of the Syrian outside Syria and inside Syria. Now I see, like anybody else, that probably some of the countries, and especially as I see it, the Russian has been trying to tell us that the situation is ripe in Syria for Syrians to go back. Sure, I mean, they went over there, they done what they wanted to do, and now it's just for the Syrian to go back. So let's look back at every place in Syria. From the study which been mentioned earlier, I don't want to say it specifically, inside Syria, Syrian inside Syria at this point, nowadays, in the year 2023, 2024, they don't feel safe inside Syria. I'm talking about areas under the regime. If we look at the area, a little bit half under control of the regime, what we call it the settlement in relation to Dar'a, in relation to Sweda, and a little bit to the northwest Syria, those are that still have the feeling that there is no freedom. They're afraid about themselves. They're afraid about their family. They see the discrimination according to ethnic group or the political aspiration. And at the same time, they fear about themselves for the future, what might happen, put aside in relation to the financial situation they're in it. The Syrian is in which they are at this point in Lebanon. Let's see, Lebanon and Jordan. They themselves, they don't feel safe or secure to come back to Syria. They rather go to the west across the ocean and ride the boat than to go back to Syria, because they feel 100% that they cannot go back because Russia said the situation is safe. Russia was one of the superpower which made Syria go to this kind of misery as we see it at this point. Now let's see at the Syrian who were refugee and came back to Syria and tried to settle over there. What happened to them? Many of them has been persecuted, has been taken away, and we don't know where they are. Their belonging has been attacked, so they don't feel secure, and they rather go back to the place they came from it. So anywhere the Syrian at that time, as a Syrian American and living in the United States, I see that Syrians are not safe, and Syria is not fit for Syrians to go back to it. Also, although I wish this could happen tomorrow or after tomorrow, but cannot happen that fast.
Let me ask you something. There are different voices that are presenting the issue of safe environment as somehow possible to break down into, let's say, different safe environments. That it's not like one holistic gradual process described in the association's roadmap, but that you can, for instance, have an economic safe environment. And that if this is achieved, or if we have early recovery, this will be an entry point for creating conditions for people to return, refugees and IDPs. Do you think if we do achieve something like this in some areas, or we declare some areas of the countries or some cities safe to return, and approach it partially in ad hoc way, will this create conditions for safe, dignified, and voluntary return of displaced Syrians?
Well, probably it's easier to answer if we look at the Syrian when they left Syria. What was the reason for the actual movement in Syria and the revolution? Dr. Mazen just mentioned for us that the three reasons for the Syrian to rise: dignity, freedom, and safety. And I don't see any financial situation in there. So finance and being well-doing financially was not the reason for the Syrian to rise, although it was a problem, but never been the first problem for the Syrian, and wasn't mentioned before. And it's not the first problem. Yes, it is a problem. The Syrians inside Syria are not feeling well financially, but if this is the problem that is causing them to try to leave Syria even at this point and go outside. No, it's not the financial situation, and we could go one by one also at the same time. I'm aware, and I know that there's some of the area under the control of Syrian regime, they're trying to improve their financial situation. That's normal. And I don't blame them for that, not because they're feeling safe, but because they're stuck, they have no other place to go. But the least thing they could do is to try to improve their financial situation. The people in Turkey, we have about 3.7 or 3.8 or 4 million individuals. Is the reason for them not to go down to Syria is financial situation? No, it hasn't been. And in the last also survey, we've seen that 80% they mentioned that the reason for them not to go back is safety, security, dignity, and ability to feel free. The Syrian in Lebanon, despite all of this situation, in a sense, they're being persecuted in Lebanon, they're having trouble and having otherwise, and still they don't go back to Syria. Is it because of the financial situation? No, probably financially is more better despite everything in Lebanon than Syria, but the problem for them is dignity, safety, and otherwise. So if we really want to be serious about taking care of that means the confidence building status or method should be taken care by the international community and the Syrians step by step, as being alluded before, in relation to their safety, freedom, and dignity. If we go otherwise, we are in trouble. I want to reflect on one more issue in relation to the history of the Syrian dealing with finance for the last 10, 12 years. Time again proven every time that Syrian government cannot be trusted with finance. During the earthquake in northern Syria and south of Turkey, the money which went to the Syrian regime, what happened to it? It was secluded in a way that will be favoring certain area which belong to him, and those other area which supposed to be inhabited by in a sense, individuals that didn't feel good with the Syrian regime, they didn't receive any significant amount. Besides, the money has been stolen by the Syrian regime. So even if you want to give money to the Syrian government, the situations go back to Syrian government. So looking at the issue as financial situation is not accurate, is not practical, is not going to be solving the problem, and we will go back to look at the initial problem that the Syrian advocated for themselves, and we see it as Syrian outside. We have to stick to those, and the financial situation will come back as next. If we don't address this as first problem, we will be causing more problem to the Syrian more than what we're trying to do as helpful situation to them. This is not the solution.
Thank you. Now I will turn to Dr. Samuel Taki, who also joined us from the United States. You have focused on strategic issues in your work, and you are, let's say, on the source of information and conversations about issues that we have discussed with previous panelists. What we are seeing is, unfortunately, when it comes to certain policy circles, that the paralysis of the political process is creating space for tacit normalization, or at least efforts at normalization of the Syrian regime. What do you believe is the way forward from this paralysis? How do you see the future when it comes to addressing issues like the safe environment and the possible political solution in Syria?
Thank you very much. I'm really honored for this invitation. Unfortunately, I waited to write my intervention till I arrived here because I wanted to understand exactly the environment here, what to speak about exactly. And that's why I wrote it in Arabic. Now I'm seeing that the translation is so bad, so I'll be speaking in Arabic, if you permit me. أولا أنا في رأيي إجابة
in reply to what Mr. Rifak has said, well, the situation, the political situation is going to move, whether either 1 year, 1.5 or 2 years. Why? Because the fundamental on which stability was based between Astana, for example, process, and now has collapsed. I mean, among the fundamentals was that the Americans left it to Syria to handle the situation. I mean, after October 7th, the major danger that happened is we see that Iran is also trying to interfere in the region. Iran is considered as a country that has a superpower in the region, and therefore it's very difficult to discuss the situation. Now, the danger, we have 2 items when we talk about the Astana process. For example, the meeting of Astana that was linked with the role of Turkey with regard to oil and also the pipeline. That is also done, because of the crisis that is happening in Syria. And there was also some kind of delegations, and there was also some after the 7th of October, things changed completely. America and Israel will not accept that Hezbollah will continue, even if there are some understandings, and therefore, as when we talk about the 2018 up until today, we see that the major power that is happening is the role of Turkey. Turkey is the power broker and not Russia. It is the middleman in terms of peace building. Something else I would like to say, if it's possible. A little comment on the discussion. There is a law in Syria, 29, that enables the security apparatus to detain, to accuse, to prosecute, to implement the verdict in an extrajudicial manner. This is a law. It is law number 29. This has to change. But nobody will be able to change it. This was possible. I mean, if we, through the reconciliation groups in Darha, among those who went for reconciliation, hundreds of them have been killed. Those who lay their arms, they have died. I have a series of ideas. In the past, I did say that there is no war in Syria without foreign intervention, but there is no return without a direct role of the Syrians themselves. The Syrians want to be able to deal, to master their own destiny, their own fate by themselves. And this is the core issue here. In practice, the civil peace will not be able unless there is a national reconciliation. If you look at Lebanon and Bosnia, for example, I mean, the solution was based on the interest of the stakeholders, the superpowers, and therefore there is no peace in Syria and in Lebanon, nor in Bosnia-Herzegovina, if we look at it in a neutral way. Now we see that Syria, the Syrian regime, has dismantled any possible national reconciliation. There are no unions, no NGOs, and in addition to that, the diaspora and the displacement has dismantled the natural components of solidarity within Syria. Everything has been dismantled. The economic also, the economic setup has been dismantled completely. When you talk about Homs and Aleppo, even the cooperatives that were there have been dismantled. And therefore, the ongoing situation is that the Syrians are not able to master their destiny anymore. Now, if I want to negotiate with the Kurdish, I cannot do that. If I want to negotiate with an Alawite, I can do that. And he cannot either come to me and discuss. And therefore, we have warlords, and the most important of which is the regime. So we are not sovereign. I'm not talking about the political part, as a social component. And therefore, as you know, even during the earthquake, I mean, the solidarity was disrupted, was not able to be there. We couldn't live together because we are deprived from handling our own destiny. And people speak on our behalf, on our own behalf. So at the end of the day, all the actors in Syria are victims of the discriminatory policies that are implemented in Syria among the different components of the Syrians. So these are warlords in Syria, and even the regime who is feeding on the war economy, basically. And therefore, when we talk about economic recovery, this is quasi impossible. The Syrians, what they need to do is to reconcile the different components of Syria, and regardless of, we need to have a return of the return of displaced have to be in a safe environment, and we need to have early recovery. We tried to provide some economic projects to make them successful in Syria in order to have a positive environment. That didn't happen. That didn't happen, unfortunately. A lot of initiatives have basically failed because of the de facto regime authorities. So the results that are possible, the solutions that are possible that the Europeans can help us implement is that the returnees have to come in conditions of safe environment, and to put an end to the deprivation imposed by the regime on our freedoms, liberties. As you know, we cannot implement any positive step in Syria, socially speaking, because the government, the regime, is there to dismantle completely any initiative of reconciliation or any collective action. I don't want to talk about the safer environment because our colleagues spoke about that. Now, we need to boost the dialogue, the reconciliation dialogue, and we also need to have the sanctions. I mean, we need to sanction the warlords, and the biggest warlord is Assad and his regime, in order to make sure the safe environment. But if we think that if we make a condition to the regime to let the returnees come safely back in, I think this is absolutely not practical and it's not doable. Another thing I would like to say as well, I mean, there are so many things, but I will, there are many studies on this issue in the center, and in this Orient Research Center. The Europeans, I mean, there are requests. So we should not look into the issue of Syria unless the Syrians are involved. They have to be involved. I mean, this is absolutely fundamental. We don't want people to speak on our behalf. We don't want any proxy stakeholders or interlocutors. And therefore, we have been excluded, completely excluded from the possibility to give our own opinion on our situation. And there will not be any solution to that. The returnees issue is not going to be solved. If Syria, well, look at Lebanon, there is no civil war. However, unless there is a societal agreement, consensus to live together, well, we are going to continue fleeing the country and live elsewhere. So, in a nutshell, I think there are so many Lebanon who have so many Lebanese who have left because of the political makeup of Lebanon. A lot of people have left, although there is no war, but still people feel that they don't feel home in Lebanon. And this is what is going to happen in Syria unless we have a different approach. So it is important to sanction population, the warlords, the regime. We need to have these levers to make sure we pressurize the regime in order to be able to revamp this policy in a very practical way.
Thank you. I will ask you another question, but I just want to make a remark, organizational remark. We will just work through. So if you want to grab a coffee while we are talking, you are more than welcome to. It's in the hall, but we will not break for a coffee break. We will work through because the conversation is, I think, too important to now make a kind of a cut it short for a coffee break. I'm sorry if you find that a bit too harsh, but it's a decision that's been made.
I like your dictatorship.
Yes.
I like your dictatorship.
Yes. Soft Bosnian dictatorship, let's put it that way. Only when coffee is concerned. Anything else, we're very democratic. I want to ask you a question before we go to the discussion. We have some questions. And by the way, a clear instruction to anybody online who wants to ask a question, they have to disclose their full name and affiliation. We need to be able to know who is asking the question. But I want to ask you one more question, and that is, based on your research, your contacts, your knowledge, what do you think we will see in terms of policy on Syria by international actors, especially Western international actors, and especially considering the political turbulences, the elections in the United States, and also the European elections, which everybody is predicting will bring an unprecedented rise of the right wing in Europe. How does this bode for Syrian policy, and what should Syrians be doing? You have explained, I think, very eloquently that Syrians have the key role to play if they want to save their country, if you want. How can Syrians adapt to what is on the horizon?
Too many questions. So I think, first of all, there is now an attempt to delegate Saudi Arabia. There is a perception that Turkey is only interested in the northern Syria and creating a safety zone, etc., for PYD, etc. But its own interest, its will in involvement doesn't go beyond this in further involvement. So the main task now is to delegate the Arab countries, just like that what they are doing now in Gaza, trying to create a strategic pillar as a substitute to the Iranians, a substitute to the Turkish that are reluctant now from being more involved in the Syrian issue. So my point here is that in this climate, there is an attempt to give the Arabs some exemptions from the sanctions and to allow them more and more for normalization, including not only with the regime, but only with the Eastern Euphrates, so that they can build relations with the Kurds, they can build so that they can have more leverage upon what's going on in Eastern Euphrates and within Syria. So under the title of leverage, they will be given some margin of maneuver as they will be delegated in a way or another. And with the rise of the right in the United States and in the United States, there is no real refugee issue. But in Europe, it is now the political issue, in spite it is too much inflated. If I speak about Germany, for example, which are welcoming to have more demography. But this is another issue. But the point here is that what the Europeans have, they will press toward the return of refugees. But this will not happen. It cannot happen. Even if they come, this will be a rhetoric. There will be more oppression. There will be some more repelling people. And there will be a conflict with Turkey about who will take the burden of those errant people between the borders of Europe, different borders of Europe. This is understandable. But what we can say is that now everybody is trying to think about, because the perception, not only about the riot in Europe, but also in the coming 1.5 years, there will be a shaking of the Syrian situation. There is no doubt about this in Washington. Syria will begin to become on the table, on the agenda, not as an important, but as a collateral issue that could spoil other arrangements in the region. So the point here is definitely about who will take the relay if this tent is shaken and could collapse. What kind of possibilities? Some people are saying we are able, like some Arabs are saying, we can do. Practically, I believe they won't be able to do much more than what they had done in Libya. So it's ironic. They won't be able to do anything consistent, and it will perpetuate the Syrian civil war. So my suggestion is that unless the Syrians between each others would return to have some agency on their own issue, the international community is now heading toward either finding a military who will come and oppress people, or, like in Bosnia, create a situation where every warlord will become a head of a canton or whatever, and they will bring them together and try to stick a kind of a Syria between them. This could happen. This is because this is the easiest thing to do. Then, this would mean the perpetuation of the civil war practically, and the perpetuation of immigration, which is by itself, you cannot prevent it by simple. Europeans are not going to kill people in the sea. They will keep on having refugees. If Syria will continue to be a failing state in such a way, at least without any possibility of an outlet, any hope of an outlet, as you see now from the polls, from everything, this is
well, I think that sets us up very well for a discussion on everything that we have heard in this panel. Let's have 15, 20 minutes of a discussion, if needed, maybe even more, before we turn to the next panel, which will naturally follow this last intervention of Dr. Samir. Are there any questions here in the room? We have questions online, but since you are here in presence, maybe somebody would like to say something or ask a question. No? So I will go to a question from Sarah from Syrian Women's Association. And this, I think, is a question for both Dr. Mazen and Dr. Hala from the Syrian Association. And it asks, how can roadmap to a safe environment in Syria address the presence and influence of various different extremist groups within Syria? Is that something that the roadmap can help address?
Yes.
When we spoke about the de facto authorities on the ground, we have not excluded any region or zone in Syria. We were not simply referring or only referring to the regime's areas, but we are talking about any authority that is violating the rights of the Syrians and undermining their safety in Syria, whether in the northeast of Syria or regime areas or elsewhere, because the regime is the greatest violator of the Syrians' rights. And so the roadmap is based on a political solution, which will be the foundation also for a comprehensive resolution of for all regions in Syria based on 2254 and the Geneva Conference and other relevant international resolutions. So we do not believe that any of these areas are excluded. Once we have a political solution, all parties must become compelled or obliged to implement that resolution, that solution, and to implement the roadmap for a full political solution that is based on the aspirations of the Syrian people.
Chance to comment on this, Rafiq.
Sure, go ahead, Dr. Mazen.
Okay. بالنسبة لموضوع
With regards to the issue of how we could clean, let's call it this, clean the Syria
مشروع البيئة الآمنة أو تنفيذ
scene or
هذه
theater.
البيئة الآمنة في سوريا
Firstly, the safe
هي من
environment in
مسؤولية
Syria and guaranteeing it
هيئة
is the
الحكومة
responsibility
التي
of the
تتولى
transitional
إدارة
governing
سوريا.
body that
نحن
will
نتكلم عن
manage Syria.
الحل السياسي.
We are talking here under a political solution. So once the decision makers decide to have a political solution in Syria, a government or a body of some kind will be formed, and it will undertake the implementation of the roadmap with or through the agreement with all Syrians will be responsible for establishing such a safe environment. And here I would like to emphasize an important point. When we talk about a safe environment, we do not mean personal safety. We do not refer simply to issues of detention and imprisonment. We are talking about reinstituting the dignity of human beings, dealing with them as human beings based on all the components of the roadmap. And here I would like to comment on what Dr. Samir mentioned, that the solution in Syria has two legs. One is a political decision and another is a military decision. We have a widespread availability of weapons in Syria, openly and covertly, and so any political solution must be implemented hand in hand with a military solution, and this is mentioned in 2254. And if you do not have these two pillars, we will not have a political solution for all of Syria, all the geographical land of Syria. And I would like to also emphasize that excluding Turkey from a political solution will guarantee the continued complexity and problems of the situation in Syria. And the issue in Syria will not be resolved. The solution, in our view, has three foundations: Turkey, the United States of America, and Arab countries. And if those three parties do not agree the solution in Syria, we will never have a solution. That's our point of view. Thank you.
Thank you. I now invite the next three panelists to take place here. I invite also you to stay in the front row so that you can continue the conversation. There is a lot that you need to respond to. And we go straight into the questions of international actors and the policy choices that they are making based on what we just started discussing. So, Ivan Nielsen, yes.
شكرا رفيق شكرا لكم جميعا.
Thank you, Dr. Mazen. Ivan, Omer, and Mohammed Al-Khanem, please join us. Who wanted to ask? Okay, no problem. Yeah. As I said, it's a conversation. So you can, we can start with your question, Omer, and then perhaps we will go to the rest of the panelists before we come back to you. Okay. Let me then start with my colleague on the right, Mohammed Al-Khanem. He comes from the United States, where I think when it comes to advocacy in the realm of Syrian voices being successful in being heard by policymakers, I think that there is no similar example of effectiveness of advocacy that can compare to you, and I congratulate you for that. Recently, the latest example of this advocacy, the Anti-Normalization Act that you have advocated for, has passed the House of Representatives in the US Congress. I want to ask you, what is the status of that bill? What is the status of overall policy thinking that you are trying to influence, and where do we, what can we look to in the future? Please take the microphone.
And I have 2 hours to address that question. Okay, so
invoking my Boston dictatorship powers, I will intervene in time.
yes. Well, first off, Rafiq, I would really like to thank you and the Syrian Association for Citizens' Dignity, the European Institute of Peace, not only for the kind invitation, but also for the what I truly believe is groundbreaking and prescient work. You guys have been ahead of the curve. The work that you do on concepts such as the safe environment has been really important. I hope that in Europe you're getting all the support that you need, because the work that you're doing is this thinking outside the box, this creative thinking is something that we absolutely need. So the view, of course, I'm going to address your question regarding the bill, but I think I need to maybe describe the overall picture and maybe share with you a little bit about the view that we have, the view from Washington, D.C., the view, from across the pond. So if you were to reach out to the State Department in Foggy Bottom and to ask what is U.S. policy towards Syria at the moment, they would say, we have not changed our Syria policy. Syria policy remains the same. We're not going to be normalizing ties with the Assad regime, nor are we going to be lifting sanctions on the regime. If you reach out to DOD, the Department of Defense, they would also tell you that they're still committed to the mission in northeastern Syria, that they have no plans for withdrawing troops from northeastern Syria. So I think that would be true. These responses you would get would be true. But, and here comes our critique of, and by our, I mean the Syrian American community's critique of US policy. I think that would be true, but not entirely accurate. Why? So we would contend, our contention is that there actually has been a shift in US policy, and we observed this shift a little over 2 years ago. US policy used to be, we're not going to normalize ties with the regime. And if you're an ally of the United States, if you're an Arab country and you take steps towards normalization, then hello, we have sanctions on the books and you're going to be liable. That changed to, we're not going to normalize ties with the regime, but should you make the sovereign decision to normalize ties with the regime, this is your business. And maybe while at it, maybe you can get something. So this transactionality was introduced, and I think that's why we have this Arab initiative at the moment, Arab track at the moment. And the decision is to give this Arab track a chance, with the hope that maybe it will produce some results. Now, of course, this was deeply concerning to our community, and that's when our organizations. I work for the Syrian American Council, which is the oldest and largest organization representing Syrian Americans. But I also work for the American Coalition for Syria, and that's an umbrella of 8 different organizations that coordinate their work in Washington, D.C. So all these organizations and others, about 2 years ago, when we noticed that shift in policy, we went to Congress, because the good and the bad news from the United States is that we have divided government. It's good news, it's bad news, but it's also good news. Because we have divided government, that means no one single entity or branch of the U.S. government can make all the decisions or 100% of the decisions. And as you know, Congress has the constitutional right and responsibility to exercise oversight over the federal government. So our community expressed those concerns to lawmakers in Congress on a bipartisan basis, and which means the Republicans and Democrats at the same time. And lawmakers initially gave the federal government, because we had a new boss in town, we had a new administration in town, so lawmakers gave this new administration a chance, a grace period. But then there was an alignment between our position and the lawmakers' position, and they started expressing those concerns to the federal government. Until a decision was made that lawmakers were not happy with the direction that American policy was taking, and they decided to take matters into their own hands. Since then, American lawmakers from both parties, Democrats and Republicans, have gone on the record over 6 different times in the House and in the Senate, basically stating their opposition to this tolerance of normalization or tacit green light that was given to normalization, and clearly expressing where they believe Syria policy should be headed. So now I can say that this opposition or this new position has solidified in Washington, D.C. There is overwhelming support for a vision of Syria policy that does not support, normalization, that says that so long as atrocities and war crimes and other violations persist, that sanctions will not be lifted. Among other things. And the bill that you asked me about, the Assad regime anti-normalization bill, was one of the more recent examples, because when it passed the House, it passed with 389 votes. The bill had 52 co-sponsors, original co-sponsors, Democrats and Republicans. And then when it was put on the floor for a vote, it garnered 389 votes, affirmative votes, versus 32 nays only. So an overwhelming majority. And actually, just a few days ago, we were successful in also adding a new amendment to the Department of Defense, the NDA, the National Defense Authorization Act, regarding both normalization. Two different amendments regarding both normalization, but also regarding captive gun. So now on the books, we have 3 different pieces of legislation regarding Captagon, something that the administration also neglected in the past. And that's, when lawmakers, our community in partnership with lawmakers, stepped up and crafted policy that made it incumbent on the American federal government to take on this issue. About a month ago, Captagon 2, that's a second piece of legislation regarding dismantling the regime's drug networks, was passed. And just a few days ago, we had a new amendment that basically this new amendment asked the Department of Defense to step up its efforts regarding the combating of this trade and to treat it as a national security threat. So to sum up, I think now there is an alternative official voice in DC that is bipartisan, and that includes the president's party, the Democratic Party, that is not entirely pleased with the fact that the administration has sort of like deprioritized Syria over the past 2 years, and turned a blind eye, let's say, to normalization, and that has been clearly expressed to the administration. Initially, it was through tweets and statements, but then through letters to Secretary Blinken and the Secretary of Defense, and then through letters to President Biden, and then through 6 different pieces of legislation in just 18 to 19 months. So that is very, very significant. And our community in the United States, it would be no exaggeration to say that our community and our organizations have been at the forefront of this very active legislative movement. I'll conclude here with an example. So after the earthquake, the United States, to facilitate the delivery of humanitarian assistance, etc., issued General License 23. And General License 23 was a blanket general license that basically operated on the honor system. All you had to do was to basically stake the claim that a particular transaction was going to be carried out for humanitarian reasons, and you were covered under the General License 23, and it was issued for 6 months. Of course, sadly, the license was abused, and so there were some people in Washington, D.C. who wanted to extend that license for 2 years, and lawmakers were swift from both parties to speak up on that and to say absolutely not. So the State Department had to reach out to lawmakers to share with them that General License 23 was not going to be renewed. So here, the point that I would maybe encourage our European colleagues to take into consideration is that what we're working on in the United States should be actually welcomed as leverage. We are not interested in perpetuating the deadlock in Syria, and the work that we do is not because we simply just want to exact punishment on the regime. That's not what we have in mind. But what we have in mind is building leverage for Syrian and American and European negotiators. You may recall that the Special Envoy of the Secretary General, the office was created about 10 years ago, and over 10 years they've been trying to produce any progress, and they have not been able to produce any progress because the regime has been very intransigent. So in order to get any meaningful concessions from the regime, you need leverage. To go to the regime without leverage, you're going to get nothing, right? So we're trying to build that leverage, and we're saying that concessions can be made, but in return for measurable progress. And we have not seen that yet. So I hope that in Europe, these efforts that we've undertaken, I hope that they will be welcomed and seen in the right context. And this right context is we still have hundreds of thousands of people in jails. Half the population is displaced. So we want to ensure that American negotiators, European negotiators, and first and foremost, Syrian negotiators have the leverage they need in this process. And so everything we do is within this frame.
Let me ask you then another question, which will take 2 hours to answer. How do you see the possibility, does it exist, that we be able to move U.S. policy beyond what is, like you said, basically trying to contain normalization in some way, dealing with what are clearly interests of Europe and the West, and that is curbing the Captagon trade, and towards, for instance, elevating the establishment of the safe environment to the top of the political agenda, so that we are dealing with solutions rather than just simply trying to stop the leaks in the sinking ship.
Okay, so I'll be frank. U.S. policy over the past 2 years towards the entire region, towards the entire Middle East, has been one of conflict management, not conflict resolution, and that emanated from a desire. The president did not want to be consumed by Middle East crises. So when after he won, he gave a very clear directive to his staff that he'd rather not be bothered every single day by wars and problems in the Middle East. So the policy that was designed, or the strategy that was designed on that basis, was one that really sought to ameliorate conditions, provide humanitarian assistance, maintain current conflict lines, So really, conflicts, management of the symptoms of the conflicts generally across the region, in addition to working on the Abrahamic Accords, etc., but not one that wanted to really contend with the root cause of these issues and work on addressing these issues at their core. Syria was no exception. So the policy that they introduced or they adopted was also one of conflict management. So because of that, Syria generally was not prioritized. We always say personnel is policy, and we saw a market decrease in the number of personnel allocated to the Syria portfolio at the State Department, at the Treasury Department, and elsewhere. So I do not think that we are on the cusp of major rejuvenation of that thinking.
How would you then respond to what Dr. Samir was saying? As far as he believes that there will be
I don't know about a shakeup, but I actually agree with him that Syria is going to force itself onto the American agenda, simply because this policy of conflict management that I just it is completely blown up. Our national security advisor had an op-ed in Foreign Affairs that came out on October 7th that said the Middle East is the quietest it has ever been. Of course, that had been in the print version, it's still there, but online version that had to be changed, right? So this policy proved to be ineffective. You do need to address problems at their cores, and Syria is no exception. So I agree with Dr. Taqi that eventually Syria is going to force itself onto the American agenda, and I think we're seeing some of that underway anyway. But in terms of American policymakers, at least within the federal, the executive branch of government, do I think that they're on the cusp of pursuing a different approach to Syria at the moment? No. Now, however, our representatives from our community recently, they engaged both campaigns, the Biden campaign and the Trump campaign, and there was recently a meeting in Michigan between our community and the Trump campaign, and we have the sense that should there be a change of guard in the United States, that there would be a different approach, and maybe that's something I can address later. So no, I don't think we're on the cusp, but I think slowly but surely they will come to this realization. They've been trying to avoid this problem. They tried that under the Obama administration, it completely failed, spectacularly failed. I think they tried to do that over the past 2 years, and it has not been effective. So eventually, I think they're going to have to contend with the fact that you do need a different approach.
Thank you so much. I will, of course, come back to that Trump thing later. But let me go to Omer. We have heard in the previous panel that Turkey, or let me be correct, Turkey is fast becoming one of the most important actors in the Syrian conversation. How do you respond to that? Does Turkey see itself as one? And where do you think lies the possibility of Turkey actually being a champion of elevating establishment of safe environment in Syria to the top of the political agenda?
I can answer once again.
Sure.
So first of all, thanks for this invitation by the European Institute of Peace and SACD. I am really honored to be here with you. And when it comes to the perspective of Turkey, let me first say one thing and then go on. I cannot imagine a future of Turkey without Syria and Syrians, and I cannot imagine a future for Syria without Turkey. I mean, just looking at this from a demographic perspective, the number of Syrians living inside Turkey and in the Turkish protected areas inside Syria are approximately the same, to some guess even more, than the number of Syrians living in regime-held Syria. So this has to show something. And Turkey is going to be an important part of Syria, and Syria is going to be an important part of Turkey. So, and let me comment on one small detail of Mohammed Ala being so diplomatic, but I am less diplomatic. We know that in the United States of America, there are in the National Security Council forces who not put a blunt eye on the Arab normalization attempts with the Assad regime, but actually advocate for them. So we have to underline this, that there is a force who wants the normalization of the Assad regime, and this emancipates from the perspective of preserving the gains and the relationship the United States of America made with the YPG-dominated Syrian Democratic Force. So this is a niche approach, which is in its doctrine military and which is in its doctrine embedded in preserving the personal career gains of some certain people. Anyway, let's come back to Turkey. I do believe that when we look at Turkey's perspective on Syria, there is this discrepancy between north of Turkey and south of Turkey. When Turkey looks to its north, there is a huge war ongoing in Ukraine, and the European Union is investing millions of money, the United States, and we are all supporting Ukraine against the Russian invasion, and even huge amounts of weapons and supplies have been sent to Ukraine, and Turkey is also an important part of this process. But when Turkey looks to the south, the situation is completely different. We don't have a Russian-American war competition, but Turkey sees a Russian-American cooperation that is blocking Turkey from conducting new military operations in northern Syria. And this impasse is being preserved for the last 5 years. The last Turkish military operation was in 2019. And since then, the Russian military is on the ground protecting the US-supported YPG, the dominated Syrian Democratic Forces. And the US maintains a sanctions threat against Turkey if Turkey launches a military operation. So this Russian-American cooperation has established a balance of power in Syria in which no one can move. And in 2020, Turkey showed that Turkey will not allow that a military solution will be forced upon the Syrian people, and that Turkey is willing to risk the lives of its own soldiers to maintain the political solution in Syria and to prevent a migration wave towards Turkey in the region of Idlib in 2020. So in this balance of power, Turkey is now in a searching mode. How can we find a gap? Who can find an alternative? And as a result of this approach, we have seen that Turkey actually approached Damascus and tried to speak with Damascus and to find a common ground, but it failed miserably. I mean, the Assad regime was quite clear in demonstrating that it's not willing to make any concessions or not willing to cooperate. And I think the Turkish attitude, and there is in Turkey a strong force from the Turkish opposition, in particular, that advocates to speaking with Damascus, as they have a misunderstanding of what the Assad regime is and what its priorities are. Many Turkish security experts believe that Assad's primary interest is preserving Syria's territorial integrity, which is not. Its primary interest is preserving the regime's presence. So it wants to survive. And secondly, they think that some of the Turkish experts think that Damascus and Ankara can work together. But the issue is, from the perspective of Damascus, Ankara is a threat, not a potential partner. So therefore, these talks failed. And now Turkey is in a situation in which it sees that the United States of America could potentially withdraw from Syria, and that this could open a new avenue, a window of opportunity to do something new in Syria. And what I my person as an expert, have foreseen this, and I'm advocating since almost 3 years now that the United States of America and Turkey have to work together in Syria. And here, let me also put in the domestic aspect of Turkey's approach to Syria into this big picture. After the refugee deal with the European Union, the Turkish society sentiments changed in regards to Syrian refugees. Up until then, it was quite good, and the Turks were quite polite, and they were welcoming the Syrians. But then it changed because the refugee deal gave the Turks the impression, and let me put this into the words of a liberal, I mean, he is a liberal, Turkish journalist who's very famous, is how the Turkey become the refugee dump of Europe. So this is the perception in the Turkish society. And this unjust, and I don't agree with this assessment, but this perception is forcing Turkey to first prevent new migrations and to find avenues to facilitate return of refugees back to Syria. And here, I believe I can connect with your question to the safe environment. The official numbers in Turkey are decreasing. 3 years ago, we had 3.7 million Syrian refugees registered in Turkey. Now we have 3.1 million, and it's decreasing every day almost. And the reason for this decrease are two. The first is the Syrian refugees who went to Europe were never delisted from the Turkish register. So it took time to find out that they went to Europe because the Syrian refugees did not tell the Turkish authorities, I'm going to Europe, bye-bye. So therefore, they had to be delisted. And 1 million is not a small number for the official record. A second reason for the decrease in numbers is that some Syrians went elsewhere, like Egypt, etc., but this is very minor. The main issue is return to Syria. And we know that not from the official numbers of the Turkish government, but from the numbers of the border gates in Syria, that over the last 1.5 years, more than 100,000 Syrian refugees returned back to Syria. So all of them are legally under voluntary return, but the reality is a different one, as we all know. So, and Turkey wants to facilitate this process of return, and Turkey wants to enable as much return as possible. Turkey isn't believing that all of the refugees will return, but to reduce the burden on the Turkish society, because the Turkish sentiment is going to the worst. So here, the Turks are quite pragmatic. They don't think according to lines of safe environment. They think according to lines of housing, infrastructure, economy, and basic needs. So this is the Turkish approach. So housing, we see that there's an immense effort by the Turkish authorities in collaboration with Arab states and Arab NGOs to establish new housing projects. And we see that there is a huge construction project ongoing in northwest Syria. And we see that Turkey has provided electricity, water to these regions, which is much better than the electricity and water supply in Damascus. However, there are some limitations, one of which is territory. This area had a pre-war population of 1.5 million. Now it's already 5.5 million. And with more refugees returned back to this area, it has a limit. Therefore, Turkey tried to speak with Damascus, but it failed miserably. The Damascus and Assad regime is not interested in accepting. And I think if safe environment, this topic, could be articulated to Turkish decision makers as an avenue for Syrian refugee return, they would be interested to listen. But if we articulate safe environment as an issue that is an obstacle in front of refugee return, they won't listen to this concept. So it is important to acknowledge that the Turkish society, unfortunately, has a need for a lower number of Syrian refugees that could be integrated in the future. But at the moment, the main focus of the Turkish policy makers is how much can we get back to Syria?
Let me just ask you one follow-up question before I go to Ivan. And that is the area of influence in northwest Syria. Like you just described, there isn't really an approach that would prioritize safe environment. There are problems there as well when it comes to safety, security. Our research from the association consistently shows that. How can we communicate that to the decision makers in Turkey, that this is an issue, that the return, sustainable return, especially if we are talking about people who are not from there, like you said, the original population is far smaller than what is it currently. security and safety is absolutely a priority for them. How can we put that on the table?
So, first of all, I understand the argument that these people are not from these places, so they should not return to these places. I 100% understand this argument. But looking from Ankara, it doesn't make sense. For Ankara, what is the difference of a Syrian living in Gaziantep, Istanbul, Hatay, or living in Elbab, Idlib? What's the difference? They are both not at home. So from the Turkish perspective, this argument of they should return back to the areas they are originally from doesn't make much sense. And what I can say is how this argument of safe environment can be articulated to Turkish officials is that to put this into a perspective with numbers and to put this into a perspective with the Turkish mentality, we have to understand that the Turkish mentality is more focused on things you can touch rather than concepts. So how can safe environment be included into projects, into an approach that is touchable? How can this be connected? How can the security issues in this region, which need to be resolved, which need to become better for the return of refugees, be connected to the safe environment concept? How can we maybe, and I'm not sure, and you have spoken about this, how can safe environment be a village? If you understand what I mean. How can safe environment be a housing complex? Because this is the way the Turks think. They don't think in abstract concepts, they think in concrete, touchable things.
Thank you. We'll come back to that, and I still remember you have a question for Dr. Altaki. But let me ask Ivan. We have heard a lot about, especially from Mohammed's intervention, about how European policymakers could use the leverage that is the resulting from this advocacy work. But let me ask you, is there a European policy when it comes to Syria? Is there a coherent understanding of policy priorities and beyond the investment in the containment of the refugee flow?
Well, first of all, many thanks for the invitation and good meeting all of you, including out there. Yes, there is a EU policy. There is a stated policy. Somewhat is all anchored in a very lengthy document called the European Council Conclusions from 2018. And without simplifying it unnecessarily, it is basically, it can be summarized to the 3 no's, and that is no to normalization, no to lifting sanctions, no to reconstruction support before a political process in line with 2254 is firmly underway. And if we just unpack that a bit, the premise for that policy was and remains as a stated policy, and only through a combination of carrots and sticks would there be any prospect for the regime to engage in good faith in any political process. I'll be the first one to say, sadly, that we have seen absolutely no effect of that policy in that neither the carrots nor the sticks have been working. And I think it sounds a bit cynical, but I think we also have to be honest that there's never been any political process, genuine process when it comes to, let's say, pursuit of a political solution vis-a-vis Syria. Yes, meetings have been taking place, quite a few, I should add, but there's not really been any process. Why? Because the regime, and obviously the backers of the regime, have not been anywhere near a point where they felt it was in their interest to engage in that process in good faith. Over time, sadly, we have seen that certain, let me say, EU policymakers have somewhat, instead of actually staying loyal to the very simple conflict and political analysis, they appear to getting more itchy fingers in that they are more focusing on, they're less focused on the sticks and more focused on the carrots, even though from a simple analytical perspective, I think all of us would quickly agree that they would not work. I can only say, and kind of summarize in a very simple way that, as we're all aware, there have been a number of different normalization efforts. We have seen the readmission of Syria into the Arab League. And I think if we summarize what drove that, it was somewhat a wish from certain Gulf countries that to serve their interest of security and pushing back on the Captagon, and also vis-a-vis the whole refugee piece, they assessed that this was the way to go to have some deliveries on those three files. And with a bit of a smiley, yes, there has been one delivery from Damascus that is more Captagon. So I think that is exactly the opposite effect that we've been seeing. And it just confirms that, also as my colleagues have been saying, that we have not seen any sign, we're not seeing any signs of any genuine goodwill from the regime to engage in that political solution. If anything, they have actually moved even further away from the goal. It is as if they were in front of the goal previously, at times they're moving behind the goal. So I think against all of that, and driven by a number of, is there other political considerations in Europe, not least domestic political considerations, where the core European interest also being in a more, let's say, close geographical proximity to Syria than, for instance, the US, is that let's say the interests vis-a-vis migration, refugees, security concerns, and considerations have somewhat led certain policymakers to make the fundamental mistake to actually try to look at the symptoms instead of the root causes. And their policy, their approach is increasingly guided by providing some symptom relief, a bit of paracetamol, whether it's 250 grams or 500 milligrams, we can debate, but we all know that a paracetamol expires after a certain time, the relief lapses after a certain time, and actually only until and unless you address the root causes of the conflict. And we can summarize them to corruption, oppression, marginalization, impunity. The list is long. Until and unless we are honest about the root causes, I'm very concerned that we will not get anywhere near, for sure not a good solution, if any solution at all. And that is, I think, from a European, let's say, and I should say, I guess, you know, I used to be a diplomat, so now I'm anything but diplomatic, so I'm just an ordinary citizen. I think that's most frustrating as an ordinary European citizen, is that policies seems to be shying away from what is needed, from the right thing to do in terms of supporting the changes we all think Syrians both need and deserve, but also that actually it is mind-blowing that the policies sometimes actually not serving European interests. For me, those two are not incompatible. It is only until and unless you address the root causes that actually Europe will also have been able to address their own core interests of migration and refugees. You can't disconnect the two. But increasingly, policy responses are yet again driven, guided by symptoms instead of the root causes. If I may just add one bit, and that is, for me, the key issue, the one we really have to follow closely, is the one of normalization. And normalization can take many forms and shapes. There's obviously the full-blown, where a country goes back to Damascus, reopens its embassy, an ambassador hands over his or her credentials to the regime. But normalization can also take many other shapes and forms. And that's what we see from certain European quarters now. Just to mention a few, obviously there's more diplomatic engagement. Concretely, there are more European visits to Damascus now than before. Two, we have also seen it, and for instance, when it comes to the refugee file, you may be aware that was it last week or 10 days ago, there was a letter signed by 8 European countries. I'm sad to say that Denmark was one of the signatories, was actually saying the need to reassess the conditions for refugees to return to Syria. But if you read that statement carefully, towards the end, it somewhat says that while it is acknowledged that there's not complete political stability yet, blah, 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 the notion that those countries' assessment is that there's some political stability is, for me, mind-blowing. There's no political stability in Syria, but obviously you try to drum up your case in pursuit of other objectives. So yet again, increasingly, you move your eyes away from the ball. Sadly enough, you focus more on this more tactical bits, which serves more short-term political interests.
Let me pick up on that and related to the issue of the safe environment. Like we said in the beginning, safe environment now is becoming a new buzzword. We had a few over the years, but unfortunately not in the sense that we have discussed before as being the heart of the possible prelude to a political solution, but actually being seen as in a partial ad hoc ways like economic safe environment or this safe environment, that safe environment. What are possible long-term consequences of that approach that you basically described, trying to deal with symptoms rather than the root causes? And as you said, unfortunately, your own country, Denmark, has a history of that kind of declaring certain areas safe so that refugees, Syrian refugees in Denmark were withdrawn the protection, then having to renege on that and so on. There seems to be like touching and probing where can we achieve not a real change, but actually narrative change vis-a-vis Syria.
I think first on, I think you referred to it as a bit of a buzzword these days, SCNE, safe, calm, and neutral environment. I think when dealing with that term, that concept, I think we just have to go down memory lane a tiny bit and recall its origin, because it came about in the Geneva Communique back in the days, as well as in 2254. And its origin was very simple. There was a premise, even though obviously international actors at that time nor now agree, but there was somewhat a premise that safe, calm, and neutral environment can only be brought about if there's a new arrangement in Syria. It is not something that we can expect the current regime, the current arrangement to bring about. So that's very, very important to have in mind. So that's why I almost, from that perspective, insist that when we talk about SCNE, we confine it to track 1 and 2254 and political solution, and not go down to track 2 or track 3 or any other context. So that's very important. Then coming back to your question more squarely, I think, for instance, safe environment, for instance, also what others are somewhat putting on the table about generating some economic wheels to spin, to have some economic growth and also a bit more of a confidence building among communities. I'm definitely not against that. But yet again, I would insist that whatever at least the international community supports is support in such a way that those measures, those efforts, those achievements do not become ends in themselves, but rather means towards something else, because none of that is an end state. It's not an end state for Syrians to have a confined safety environment in a certain geographical area. The end state is yet again a new arrangement, a new Syria, basically. So we have to be very cautious that whatever is supported do not become ends in themselves. And if I may add on that, also exemplify, that's also one of the reasons why I am concerned about this whole, another new concept, or not a new concept, but the talk in town, not least here in Brussels, around the Brussels conference environment, is the one of early recovery. And while I'll be the first to say I'm the strongest advocate for any support to Syrians in need, full stop. So that's the what bit, support, support, support. But it is as important, the what bit, early recovery, humanitarian, stabilization, as important how you support it. Because if you support in the wrong way, you actually may end up doing more damage than good. And you may actually jeopardize what we, even though we don't agree on the end state, but you jeopardize even the way towards an end state.
Very briefly, last question to you, Ivan. How do you think things will pan out with the outcome of the European elections vis-a-vis Syria policy?
Well, I think if history has shown anything, it's very difficult to predict outcome of elections before we have somewhat done all the counting and the numbers. But if the some of the analysis is anything to go by, there will be, let's say, generally a shift to the right in the makeup of the European Parliament. And I think if that is to happen, I think it is equally fair to say that then there will be even stronger push from the European Parliament side to have more tighter, more stricter regulation on not only migration but also refugees, and that obviously, sadly enough, may come with some additional challenges and risks for Syrians in Europe.
Thank you. I have one last question for all three of you, which I'm saving for the end, but I'll open for discussion. If we have anyone who has a question or would like to comment at this point, before I give Omer the chance to ask his question to Dr. Altaki, please. Yes, gentleman there. Can we get him a microphone?
Yes.
You can have mine.
Hello, everyone. My name is Saleh Rifai. I am Syrian Basque, and I represent the Basque Country delegation to the European Union. My question is
just hold the microphone in front.
Okay, perfect. So my question is for Mr. Ivan. How can you think that the European Union could change its politics in regards with the Syrian crisis? And how can we support the Syrian diaspora, as it was mentioned before, in Europe, to be able to organize itself and enable also to offer a common and effort in a democratic institution such as the European Union? So I would like to know, how can we change that? How can we organize ourselves as Syrians in Europe in order to put more efforts, such as like Syrian diaspora in the United States, to politically and socially also? So thank you.
Should I answer now, or do you want to take more questions? Okay. A great question, and if we had a full answer to that, I think we would have come a long way. But rather talking about what we may not be able to do, let me zoom in on what we can do. I think, and that this is not Syria specific, but yet again, the Syrian revolution started almost 14 years ago. And to keep any file on a table, including a European table, it requires a lot of investment, a lot of focus and the like. And I must say, even though I'm obviously very biased and frustrated that we are not seeing more progress now, if we look at it, that the fact that we had a Brussels conference a few days ago, which was number 7, was actually quite remarkable in itself, because many other contexts, after 5 or 6 or 7, 8 years, it really disappears from different agendas and the like, because the bandwidth of policymakers and ministers in all capitals, I don't want to sound too cynical, but very limited. There are 2 or 3 headlines at a time that somewhat drives the machineries in capitals. So 14 years later, I think we should acknowledge that there's still some attention, as we saw with the Brussels conference, but we should also acknowledge that we really want to invest. We have to invest even more if we want to keep that level of attention, and we have to invest even more if we want to increase that level of attention. So that, coming back to your question, I can only encourage everybody, whether it's in a national setting or across borders, because I agree with you, there's a lot of unexploited potential in, let's say, Syrian diaspora, Syrian communities, but also other, let's say, environments supporting the Syrian people in Europe to work closely together. I'm not arguing in favor of one big grand organization. I think that's a waste of time to set that up, and also far too complicated. But it's a matter of connecting the dots between existing environments and organizations. But then otherwise, really keep on keeping Syria on the map. It's very simple that sometimes, also with the younger generation, yet again, they started more than 14 years ago, we need to make them aware. Why? Because only if you're aware, you can understand, and if you understand, you can engage. So it's about really getting out there, use every mean opportunity to pursue those strands. I know it's a fairly generic answer, but I genuinely think that is the way forward.
So Rafiq was asked me to share some thoughts about diaspora in Europe, organizing and sort of like doing stuff similar to what we do in the United States. Of course, we would highly encourage you to do so, and we would be more than happy to share our thoughts with you. Give you, if you're interested, the playbook that we use in the United States that maybe you can emulate or use. But there's a couple of things actually that I would like to stress. First and foremost, I would not look to the European Union or European member states to help me with that. That's not what we did in the United States. One major issue that we have right now in Syria, and that's something that Dr. Taqi eloquently talked about, is this lack of independence in decision making, this lack of agency. So what we wanted in the United States to do was to stake a claim to that independence in decision making. So I didn't go to Congress and ask for Congress permission. I didn't go to any administration. We've worked now with 3 different administrations. I didn't go to any single administration and say, do we have your permission so that we could do this? We went to our community members and we said, this is something that we have to do. And the funding, because that's a key issue, I would stress, has to be 100% from Syrian Americans. Because if you get funded by an external party, then at the end of the day, there's going to be some strings attached, no matter how good that party is. At least you're going to have to, take their agenda into consideration. And that's not what we do. We wanted to amplify the voices of Syrians, period. And so funding, over the past 12, 13 years, we've not accepted funding from any non-American Syrian sources. And because of that, we enjoy this independent voice. You may have seen, for example, there was a piece in the Washington Post recently where we spoke very frankly against something that the administration wasn't terribly happy with, what the Assad regime Anti-Normalization Act, and they tried to intervene in the Senate to stop it. So we had that independence to go to the Washington Post and to speak, to frankly speak and express our views. So the playbook is the easiest part. That's something that technology that we already have, would be happy to share with you. Of course, I would acknowledge that different contexts are different. Like different contexts, I'm not suggesting that the way we did it in the United States is exactly the same way you're going to do it in Europe, because there are different political contexts, and we have to take that into consideration. But overall, I think the desire, if you have the desire, we have the technology, we'd be happy to share it with you. And I would not wait for anyone's permission. I would not go and ask anyone to help me set that up. I would do this it has to be 100% Syrian initiative. But I would also like to address a very valid point that the special envoy also talked about, because we hear rumblings also in the United States. I mean, let's be honest, guys. This has been going on for far too long. It's been 13 years. Some Syrians, forget non-Syrians, some Syrians are sick and tired, and it's like they're saying, okay, what can we do now? Okay, what is feasible now? What is practical now? And of course, I understand all of that, and sympathize sort of with it. But at the same time, we know, let's get something out of the way. Assad can never, ever stabilize Syria again. Syria will never, ever stabilize under Assad again. Don't take my word for it. Look at Daraa. Look at southern Syria. Assad was allowed, literally, by virtue or no thanks to an agreement between Israel and Russia that received the backing and the blessing of the United States to recapture southern Syria. And that happened in 2018. So since 2018, Assad has been in control of southern Syria. What has transpired since then? Now you have all these Iranian and Hezbollah militias in the south, non-stop assassinations and counter-assassinations since 2018. Syrians in southern Syria, especially the younger population, continue to leave for Europe in very large numbers. We have now about 5,000 Syrians from southern Syria in Libya, waiting for the opportune moment to cross into Europe. Okay, even though that region has been under the control of the Assad regime for the past 5-6 years. Okay, And on top of that, southern Syria now has been transformed into the gateway for the Captagon trade into the Gulf. That's how the regime literally is flooding the Gulf and also sending Captagon shipments to Europe. So we don't have stability in southern Syria, even though Assad was allowed to reestablish his control there. So let's just get something that out of the way. Assad, the country will never stabilize under Assad again. And unless we have, I understand the urge to deal with domestic, prerogatives, the impact of the refugee crisis on politics in Europe, et cetera, but unless you address that in a sustainable way, unless you do it in a way that would truly and genuinely convince someone like me to go back to Damascus. I used to be an assistant professor at the University of Damascus. I don't care what anyone in Europe says. I'll never go back to Damascus so long as Assad is still in power. We can trust between us and the regime will never happen. We'll never trust Assad again. Now, maybe someone like me will trust international stakeholders when they say, if you go back, we will guarantee your safety. And I'll think about it, like you did when you went back to Bosnia. I'll think about it. If it's credible enough, then maybe I'll do that. But if it's Assad's word, I'll never buy, we'll never believe that again. So we understand the urge, but sadly, this will blow up in our faces again, because unless you address the conditions that gave rise to the first instance of Syrians rising up against the regime, we're just going to be perpetuating the situation.
I have a question myself, but let me first go to people who asked for word earlier. The gentleman in the gray suit here. Yeah.
Thank you. Salahuddin Dabbagh.
Salahuddin Dabbagh from Syria. I would like to thank all the panelists and the organizers of this event and the participants, specifically that such a question is not raised so often, and we do need to look into this question of the safe environment specifically, which is an issue. I would like to speak on behalf of somebody who has been forcibly displaced from Turkey about 2 years ago. And he went to northwest Syria. We all know that the regime-controlled areas and all the returnees may face a lot of violations, and so we should never make people return forcibly, because they may be condemned to this is literally condemning them to a complete loss of their fate. I have been displaced from an area. I do not know if I can return to my area of origin, and the situation overall is under the de facto authorities in Syria, and there is no clear policies, and therefore we cannot possibly foresee or expect us to return to those areas, because we see that weapons are widespread and controlled. In addition to the humanitarian situation, the forcibly displaced from any country, so whether Lebanon or from Turkey, when he is in the country of residence, or where he is a refugee, where he is a productive person. But when he is forcibly displaced to Syria, then he will become a person in need, and he will be completely under pressure, and he will be and this is the reason why I really hope that this message comes across to those who are thinking or putting together policies on return. Once again, I think it is very important to really define the concept of safe environment. We are Syrians. Of course, we would like to go back to our country. We would like to, economically, we can go back to Syria and be productive, even if the situation is not that rosy, but we can economically be productive in Syria. However, we cannot return so long as Assad is there, or Fahim Isa, or we would like to go back to our Syria, our own land.
Thank you very much. Let me turn to Amir briefly, maybe in relation to the first part of this question also, but we have a question from Umut Chan. I hope I pronounced this right, from who's following online. And he says, when looking at Turkey's return policies regarding Syrians, what do you think about the impact of EU's externalization policies and funding? And additionally, what pull factors were created, if at all, by Turkey's military operations in northern Syria?
Yes, first of all, let me clearly state this. I truly believe that the Syrians have suffered not because of what they have done, but because how the international community have let them down. And there is literally no limit to how much the Syrians were betrayed over the course of the recent decade. But I have the privilege that I can visit northwestern Syria, and I went there. And the issue is there are definitely some areas that need improvement, and there are areas that need to become better. But the point is, it is getting better day by day. There are improvements in terms of security. When I first went to these areas, the checkpoints were manned by the people you named. Now the checkpoints are being manned by the military police. It's standardized, it's centralized. So there is a progress being done. But I do not believe that Turkey can resolve this issue with northwestern Syria. This is just not feasible. But what Turkey is trying to do is to reduce the pressure, the burden. And we have to understand that there are forces also in the Turkish society. We also have a far right in Turkey. And our far right is copying quite well from the European far right. It's shocking. I mean, I remember in Germany, there was the talk about the Islamisierung des Abendlandes, how Europe is becoming slowly Muslim. And they have copied this and just exchanged the word Muslim with Syrian and Europe with Turkey. I mean, they're really good in copying the far right, and it's having an impact. And Turkish society's main issue now is the economy. With a worsening economy, these racist sentiments are increasing. So in total, I think we should work with Turkey to say, okay, you want a return back to Syria, but you can only achieve this if you improve the situation. Just sending people there will not resolve your issues because they will try to come back illegally. So how can we encourage a better situation there? And this only becomes if we speak in a positive manner. And lastly, I want to make a comment on the issue of overall Syria and the Assad regime maintaining, and that you said the Assad regime, as long as he said that no Syrians would return and that the situation will not be resolved. We have to acknowledge one thing. There are not two sides to this conflict in Syria. There are three sides. The United Nations Security Council sees two sides, the opposition, the government, but we have three sides in Syria. And the European Union and the United States of America have shifted their allegiance and their support from the Syrian opposition to the YPG-dominated Syrian Democratic Forces. And in 2014, when the Obama administration made this decision to engage with the YPG, I was unfortunate to foresee that the Assad regime will become normalized, because the YPGs and Syrian Democratic Forces intent is not primarily Syrian. Its focus is different. It's an entity that's governed and ruled by Turkish citizens of Kurdish origin. And from the Kandil Mountains, they don't have their eyes and their feet in Syria. They have their eyes in the Kandil Mountains. And therefore, they lead the politics in a different way. And since then, we have seen the gradual normalization of the Assad regime, because the people who oppose the Assad regime are divided into two. The ones who support the Syrian opposition, and then the ones who support the YPG. And as long as this duality remains, the Assad regime will gain every day. It will become stronger every day. And the only way to resolve this is if we can get Turkey and United States of America at the table and make them come to an agreement on a joint approach towards Syria. And this joint approach towards Syria will not become possible until the United States of America is willing to exchange the YPG Syrian Kurds with Syrian Kurds that are acceptable to Turkey and are part of the Syrian opposition. So only if we have this, then we will see in the broader picture, as you want to advocate in the European Union. For what do you want to advocate? If we advocate for no's and no's and no's, what are the yeses? What is the policy? The United States of America cannot find a policy at the moment. They are looking to how to withdraw from Syria, but how to push forward. There is no political strategic perspective. And unfortunately, you cannot change strategic and institutional issues with tactical maneuvering. The main strategic issue in Syria is everyone speaks about 2254, but no one is willing to acknowledge that the people who support 2254 mostly support an actor that is not part of 2254. The 2254 is the Syrian opposition. Why are states who support 2254 supporting not the Syrian opposition, but the Syrian democratic forces?
Let me ask Ivan a question from Agnieszka, the European Commission. She says, it was said that early recovery, together with other forms of support, notably humanitarian aid, is needed in Syria. Could you please outline conditions and type of interventions that would be acceptable in your view, given standstill of the political context in Syria?
Thank you. I think in a one-liner, all support is relevant, but I have to insist that it's given in the right way. Because if it is not given in the right way, it may actually do the opposite of serving, or let's say do the opposite of mitigating the risks associated with it, including political risks. And before anybody starts accusing me of politicizing humanitarian file and early recovery, I'm not the one politicizing it. I'm just talking about we need to identify the political risks. And for instance, when it comes to early recovery, another buzzword here in the Brussels environment the last month, and we're all aware that the UN has been suggesting a mechanism out of Damascus or under UN auspices to provide early recovery support. I think before dealing with the mechanics and the model, I think it's important to establish some principles that needs to be in place for any mechanism providing support to the Syrian people. And that is that we can obviously not allow a mechanism where the regime either formally or de facto exercises influence on the decisions, because as we have seen since the beginning on the humanitarian file, that UN assistance going into Damascus, even under UN auspices, for sure does not benefit Syrians in non-regime control areas, because it's being politically steered, guided, if not misused. And here, don't even talk about the more specific corruption and aid diversion, which has been documented over and over again. But when it comes to early recovery, then as even the resident coordinator, the UN resident coordinator, said as much in an interview with the media not too long ago, he almost identified this early recovery mechanism as an opportunity not to be bound by sanctions. So I think coming back to our leverage, now is not the time to play off any card we have on our hand. We don't have too many, but for sure we should rather strengthen the ones we have instead of giving them up, because until and unless there is some likelihood that we'll get something in return, and we're still to see that, and I can't even see that potential right now. And sadly enough, many countries that somewhat supported the readmission of Syria into the Arab League, I think they will admit as such, confess as such, at least behind closed doors, that they are still to see how their hand reached out to Damascus is to be rewarded or responded to in a way that somewhat it gives a bit of let's say a concession or giving something in return. So coming back to also what Mohammed was saying about the US, kind of I guess the US administration's de facto signaling that we're against normalization, our stated policy, but if you are to go and normalize, get something out of it. but we haven't seen something coming out of it. It is basically normalizing for free. And I think what will be the end state of that? And that is that many will then try to turn the clock back to 2011. And apart from being absolutely an illusion, no way can turn the clock back to 2011. It for sure will not be in the best interest of Syria and the Syrians. If I may, just now that I have the word, just echo a part of what you said, Umir. I think US, EU, and also other European countries like the UK and Turkey, a premise behind their policies, despite certain agreements, is an agreement on the root causes of the Syrian conflict. So I think also, just like you, I think the time has come that those who still agree as a part of their analysis on the root causes of the conflict should actually sit down and discuss. I would say not despite the disagreements in the Northeast, but exactly because of their disagreements in the Northeast. Now the time has come to also actually get back to that table and discuss Syria in that format.
Thank you. We have a word here, and then we will start wrapping up with final comments from panels.
Thank you very much for this forum and for the invitation. I'm Reda Hamdoun. I'm a new refugee into France. I was in Turkey before that. My daughter-in-law was taken as a hostage in Turkey, and now I'm in France. So after suffering almost a year to reach France, my question to you today, to you and to everybody in the world, is that everything that's happening today to us Syrians is not a political nor a military solution to Syria. Everybody is starting to accept and refloat Assad's sinking ship. Is this the solution? Let me ask you, is this the solution? When I personally was asked in the opera, if we take you back to Syria, what would you do? I would say, kill me here in France and do not return me to Syria. And this is the position of many Syrians, all Syrians. And so the waves of migration will continue. And when Turkey tries to force the Syrians back into Syria, they return to Turkey again. They attempt to leave Syria to Turkey or to Europe or to any other hell, but not so as not to stay in Syria. You've heard in all religions and in all cultures that there's a parable of the ship and those in the base of the ship who cannot drink, make a hole in the base, and everybody drowns, whilst those above don't realize what's going on. And history has shown us that if the major powers do not agree amongst themselves to end any particular war, it will never be ended. And we've seen Russia's support for Syria. We've seen where the reach of Russia has now gotten to in Ukraine and elsewhere. We commend the EIP, which seeks to establish peace throughout the world, and we would hope that there would be a serious solution in Syria, not as you've mentioned, that we are now, that it's impossible now to reach a solution. I would seek that we cooperate now as a civil society more than hoping to cooperate with countries. We, as a Syrian civil society, have already achieved a lot, and I would call upon the European community to refocus on the Syrian crisis and
Let's just
reach a solution.
2 more questions and then have the final words from the panels. Go ahead, please.
Mariana Ali, I'm a civil society activist. What Dr. Samir has mentioned, that the final solution is in the hands of Syrians. That the Syrians should sit together and that they should decide what change will happen in their country. However, what we're seeing from the Turkish government is a demographic re-engineering that complements what the regime has done in the area, in the region. That there is a forced displacement of 100,000 Syrians from Turkey to Syria under the worst possible humanitarian conditions. This is not voluntary, nor dignified, nor safe return. And I would emphasize dignified before safe. The son of a friend of ours was taken directly from his office, from his workplace, to the border by force. And he had nothing in his pocket, no money, just an ID card. And it costs $4,000 to move him from where he was dumped to Erbil in northern Iraq. So we are suffering terrible conditions. And if Turkey wanted to negotiate with the United States with regards to some forces, some militias, some Kurdish forces, it should not be done at the expense of Syrians, because this area is not only the people living in it are not simply these militias. There are Syrians living there, and most of the people there are not Kurds. And with full respect to the Kurdish component, I've lived next with neighborly relations with the Kurds in Syria.
Thank you, Dr. Mazen.
شكرا دكتور مازن. I have two comments regarding what I've just heard, the interventions I've heard. With regards to the early support fund, which was agreed on, don't know the details yet. We as Syrians feel that this fund, given the figure that was put on it, must wait for a political solution and not before that. The conflict is not over yet. There's a proliferation of weapons throughout Syria. So how could we start any support under these conditions? That's one point. The second point is there is demographic changes that are taking place in Syria. Hezbollah has occupied entire regions on the border between Syria and Lebanon. How could you send support to those areas when their population have been displaced? And I don't understand it. So when the Syrians hear about the decisions and resolutions being taken around the world, they continue to believe that somebody wants to, the whole world wants to punish them. This is clear to everybody. Now to the issue of the situation in the north of Syria, northwest and northeast. In the northeast, the curricula in school have been changed, and there's an administration that has been imposed on the population that's living there who are Syrian. So now there is a deliberate attempt to change the culture of an entire community in this area. On the other side as well, in northwest. So we should be aware that this will deepen the splits in Syrian society. I am not against any humanitarian support to improve the services people are receiving. We all agree on this, but to entrench a situation that will cause an explosion in the future in Syria, I don't support it, and I don't know if it's deliberate or not, but thank you for the opportunity to speak here. Thank you.
Also received a number of questions, including from Mohammed from Syrian Independence Party. Many of these questions have already been answered through other people's questions and interventions, mainly about how can return begin with the presence of regime, also other forces in various different parts of the country. I will now invite you to give like 1 minute closing statement, but I would also like you to reflect in it on something that we haven't mentioned, and that is the role of the Office of the Special Envoy, because this institution plays a crucial role in everything that we have discussed, yet we somehow left it out of the conversation. So perhaps to start this time from the other side with Ivan, and then to finish with Mohammed.
Thanks. I think also that latter comment is highly relevant and perhaps actually says a lot that it's only towards the very end that we talk about the Office of the Special Envoy. And obviously we know that any UN effort cannot be assessed on what the UN is doing on its own. There are certain forces behind the UN. That is the nature of it. But having said that, I would very much like the UN in general, including the Office of the Special Envoy, to be more principled and more courageous. They have a good mandate in 2254, and with a mandate also comes a responsibility. So that's on that one. And then lastly, just if I have 20 more seconds, and that's primarily to the, let's say, to international actors and the like. One, the conflict in Syria is far from over. It is, the kinetic activity has gone down a bit. Yes, we can't dispute that, but the conflict is not over. The root causes remain the same. They're still on the table. So that leads me to say the best the international community can do is, one, for sure, support Syrians' needs, support Syrian solution, but for sure not sweep the root causes under the carpet and do all sorts of funny things, because that will come out and bite you later on, because it's anything but sustainable. So that's the one line of me.
So in short, I do still remember what kind of chaos we had in European Union when 1 million Syrian refugees came to Europe. And at that time, some speculated, will this be the collapse of the European Union, etc. The European Union, with all of its wealth, all of its big population, all of its countries, had a huge issue with 1 million Syrian refugees. And we should not be disregarding Turkey's efforts in this regard. Turkey alone hosts 3.1 million Syrian refugees, include in addition 250,000 Syrian refugees who became Turkish citizens, and 112,000 Syrian living in Turkey with residency permit. So in all of fairness, I can clearly assess that in Syria, we have 3 areas. The areas held by the YPG-dominated Syrian Democratic Forces. How many return have we seen to these areas? None. Not even the Syrian Kurds from northern Iraq return to these areas. Why is this? Why does the YPG-dominated Syrian Democratic Forces, who is the US ally against ISIS, not have a policy for a safe environment for the return of refugees? Secondly, Lebanon and Jordan made a deal with the Assad regime in 2018, 6 years ago, for the return of refugees. What happened? Almost none returned, and the ones who returned were tortured, were confiscated, were killed, were persecuted, etc. So the only region in Syria where Syrians return are not persecuted, are not tortured, are not attacked, and not seen as enemies because they return back to Syria is northwest Syria, areas controlled by the Syrian opposition. Despite all of its flawness, this is the only area which attitude is positive towards the return of refugees. Secondly, at the moment, where are people from Ghouta living? They are not living in Ghouta anymore. They live in northwest Syria. Where are people living from Kalamoun? They live in Lebanon or northwest Syria. Where are people living from Aleppo? They live in northwest Syria, Turkey, and some in Aleppo. Where are people living from Deir ez-Zor? They live in northwest Syria and in Deir ez-Zor. Where are people living from Hama? They live in northwest Syria and in Turkey and Lebanon. Where are people living from Homs? In Turkey, Lebanon, and northwest Syria. Where are people living from Deraa, Jordan, and northwest Syria? Except for Tartus and Latakia, all the people took refuge in northwest Syria. And I think the people voted by their feet when they fled from regime-held areas to northwest Syria, when they fled from YPG-held areas, from Deir ez-Zor in the southeast of Syria, up until northwest, exact opposite of Syria, on their feet, and took refuge in these areas and seek protection. The demography of northwest Syria has changed due to the massive flow of people inside Syria who took refuge and live as IDPs in northwestern Syria. So despite the flawness, we should be fair and we should acknowledge that the Syrian opposition is the only actor in Syria that tries to ensure a safe environment for the people, but it has its flaws. So how can we support them in establishing a safe environment? That's the question, not the opposite. We should not have a bad attitude, a negative attitude. We should have a positive attitude. And last sentence, if you allow me, The issue is, in Turkey, I get much more heated debate with Turkish officials and Turkish people and with the Turkish society when I defend the rights of the Syrians and when I defend them, how Turkey should treat the Syrians well, why the European Union has not accepted Syrian refugees, why the European Union is trying to kill Syrians who are on their boats trying to flee to Europe, and why the European Union is paying money to Turkey to keep the Syrians inside Turkey. I mean, the ones who are here are the lucky Syrians who had the chance to come to Europe, and not the ones who in Turkey cannot come to Europe despite they willing to.
Okay, so I'll share with you our views regarding the performance of the UN, Mr. Geir Pedersen, the UN Special Envoy, and then I'll conclude. I have 2 points to conclude with. So, unfortunately, we're deeply disappointed in the performance of the Special Envoy, and that's because of a simple reason. So the envoy's mandate is the implementation of 2254. And in our assessment, the Special Envoy over the past 2 years has actually mounted a coup against 2254. He does not believe that 2254 is implementable, and so he's been going around advocating for an alternative or something quote unquote compatible with 2254. And so that's not something that we support. Recently, some members of his team came to Washington, D.C. They went to Congress, and they really had nothing substantive to share with Congress regarding any progress they've made politically. But the main thing was them expressing their concern should the Assad Regime Anti-Normalization Act be adopted. And to us in the Syrian American community, that's truly mind-boggling, because any negotiator worth his or her salt would welcome leverage. Now, it's one thing to go to Congress and say, listen, we're on the cusp of getting a deal through with the regime, and we need you to hold off on this until we get this agreement through. But if you don't, then if we don't, then you can go ahead and do what you want. That's one thing. That's something we would support, actually, because at the end of the day, we're doing these things, as chips to be used in negotiations, as diplomatic leverage. But they really have nothing. They had nothing, and they were basically asking Congress to squander the little leverage that we have left. So this is truly perplexing to us, and we don't appreciate, again, a coup being mounted against 2254. Just keep in mind, 2254 is already the Geneva Communique watered down. We had the Geneva Communique originally, and then we needed, quote unquote, a more practical solution because political realities had changed. So in December 2015, this was turned into 2254. So now, to further water down 2254, eventually you're going to end up with something that's going to blow up in your face. And we advocate sustainable conflict resolution in Syria. We do not advocate for band-aids that can rip up, at any given moment. And then the 2 points I'd like to really hear conveyed to our European colleagues. Number one, in Syria, we in line or parallel to what I call an agenda of denial of reconstruction funding to the regime, etc. Parallel to that agenda of denial, okay, no relaxation of sanctions until the regime meet certain conditions. We need an affirmative agenda. There's about 4.5 to 5 million Syrians displaced from all around the country, as Omer said, who are now based in northwestern Syria. Most of the stabilization funding, I'm not talking about humanitarian assistance, but I'm talking about stabilization funding, funding to help create jobs and rehabilitate schools, funding that could help those Syrians remain resilient and stay where they are. We have very little has been sent to northwestern Syria. In the United States, we're sending all stabilization funding to northeastern Syria because that's where American troops are, right? And that doesn't make any sense from a counterterrorism perspective, because you're telling 5 million people in northwestern Syria that your only employer is Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS. That's the only game in town. If you need a job, you have to go to them. And ceding an entire population and a population in the millions to an extremist group doesn't make any sense. So it also doesn't make any sense if you want to help people stay where they are so they don't end up as refugees. So we need an affirmative agenda, an agenda of stabilization in northwestern Syria, across the country, but especially northwestern Syria, because this is an epicenter of suffering. That was the epicenter of the earthquake too. And the region has also been in the bullseye of the Assad regime for far too long. So we need both. We need an agenda of denial to war criminals. You're not going to get away. We're not going to let you off the hook. But at the same time, an affirmative agenda to help people stay where they are at the moment. Now, the final point to our European colleagues. Last time I was in Brussels was about 9 years ago. And I haven't been to Brussels ever since. And there's a good reason for that. 9 years ago, I came to Brussels. This was during the time of the Obama administration, because I was hoping that, that our European colleagues would help us maybe with like Syria diplomacy, especially in Washington, D.C. And we did very high-level meetings with the European Commission, representatives from different member states. And the impression I came away with was, and please forgive my candor, but I don't want to waste anyone's time. The impression I came away with was our European colleagues were keenly interested in finding out what Washington, D.C. thought, because they wanted to, yes. I would like to encourage, because Europe, you guys are directly impacted by the consequences and ramifications of the conflict and the crisis in Syria. You're the ones bearing the brunt of the refugee crisis, not the United States. We have a whole ocean separating us from that crisis. So I would like to encourage you to develop your own independent platform and policy, common policy platform regarding the things you would like to see, and to actually urge Washington, D.C. to follow suit, as not the other way around. That's something I would like to stress. Of course, would be willing and able partners in that effort.
Thank you very much. I have to finish because they will kick us out of this room in 20 minutes or so. But I just before that want to say that in the last 6 years that I've been working with the Syrian Association for Citizens' Dignity, there is one goal, one beacon that leads this work, and it is to be the voice of displaced Syrians. And I thank you all, because I think today we were. And that's important. I want to say thank you to the incredible people of the association for their work, which comes all the time under tremendous pressure with almost no resources. So thank you for co-organizing this, and the incredible team of the EIP for putting this all together and helping us. Thank you for everyone who came and everyone who was following us online. I hope those who needed to hear some of the things that were said today heard them or will hear them in the coming days. Thank you once again.